Imagine that right now, someone has placed a gold bar in your medicine cabinet, but you don't know it's there. The pharmaceutical giant does. It knows the price of every one of your illnesses, every one of your pills, and every one of your fears. In the year 2020, while the entire world was panicking about the virus, some companies were calculating losses, while others were counting profits. Over the course of 3 years, pharmaceutical corporations sold vaccines worth more than $140 billion. That's twice as much as all cookie sales on the planet during the same period. And that's just vaccines. There are also painkillers, antidepressants, insulin, cough syrups, and billions of people who simply cannot survive without them. They're called Big Pharma, but it's not just a collection of large pharmaceutical companies. It is one of the most powerful lobbies in human history, more influential than the oil industry, the tobacco industry, and even the banking sector. They create medicines, they save lives, but they also kill. And not always by mistake. In this video, we won't explore conspiracy theories. We'll present only facts, how Big Pharma manipulates laws, doctors, and even our minds. We'll explain how ordinary pharmacists became global moguls who monetize every disease, and why this industry always has a reason to keep the price of life high. Stay with us until the end. You'll learn why sometimes it's more profitable for us to remain sick than to recover. Imagine falling ill in the middle of the 19th century. A pharmacist greets you at the drugstore, you describe your symptoms: headache, fever, indigestion. He nods, goes into the back room, and personally starts preparing your medicine. He doesn't pull it from a shelf. He literally mixes tinctures, powders, and extracts by hand. Pharmacists were chemists, marketers, and therapists all in one. It was a unique but highly inefficient system. Medicines were expensive because they were prepared manually. Ingredient delivery took weeks. Each prescription was individual, and mass production simply didn't exist. Everything changed when scientists learned how to make real medicines. Not just tinctures and ointments, but pure substances. For example, morphine was first isolated from opium in its pure form. For the first time, it was possible to accurately dose the drug and standardize its composition. This was the first milestone in turning pharmacy into an industry.
The next stage was synthesis.
When chemists learned how to create medicines not from plants, but from molecules, reagents, and equipment, there was no longer any need to wait for a rare flower to bloom. Now, everything depended on formulas and production lines, and then came the Industrial Revolution. Factories began mass-producing medicines. Tablets, capsules, injections appeared. appeared. Standards emerged, quality control, and most importantly, scale. The more you produce, the cheaper each unit becomes. The scale effect kicked in at full power. But there was another factor that transformed the market: money. Big money. As soon as it became clear that medicine meant profit, investment poured into the industry. Research began, development, patents. Companies started fighting for monopolies on every formula. Take insulin, for example. Initially, it could only be produced manually from the pancreases of animals. It was a scarce, expensive drug, until the American company Eli Lilly figured out how to produce it industrially. Insulin became cheaper, but the patent for the technology remained with the company. And now, if you want to live, you pay. A lot. From that moment on, pharmaceuticals were no longer a science for the sake of health. It became a market. And the players in that market were corporations obligated to generate profits for their shareholders. If the health of society aligns with financial interests, great. But if it doesn't, profit will win. Pharmaceutical companies evolved from tiny family-run businesses into empires. That same Eli Lilly started with 1 factory and 4 employees. Today, it ranks among the top 10 players in the industry. The same goes for Pfizer, Merck, and Bayer. Nearly all modern pharma giants were founded in the late 19th, early 20th century. It was a time of rapid growth, but also a time of the first scandals, the first deaths from faulty drugs, the first manipulations. But as soon as the business reached a certain size, it stopped focusing solely on medicine. It began to influence the rules of the game. Pharmaceutical companies began as modest family shops. But once they got a taste for scale and profit, they stopped being just drug manufacturers. They became a force, a system. An invisible hand deciding what makes it onto pharmacy shelves, which diseases get attention, and which are left in the shadows. And all of that might be tolerable, if those corporations only healed. But when health becomes a commodity, every medicine gains a new price. The price of silence, the price of life, the price of dependence. The more we get sick, the more they earn. And at that point, where need meets greed, the most interesting part begins. Pharmaceutical craft turned into a global business. Now it's time to open the door to where few dare to look, behind the scenes of pharma. How they influence doctors, laws, and our consciousness. This part is about manipulation, advertising, gray schemes, and the dirtiest drug in history. When a pill becomes a business, its composition is no longer the main thing. It's how you sell it that matters. From this moment, Big Pharma stopped being a laboratory and became a machine for generating demand. First came advertising. Today it's everywhere, on television, in blogs, in glossy magazines. But few people know that even 100 years ago, drug manufacturers were already deep into marketing. And they did it bluntly, directly, but extremely effectively. One striking example, wine with cocaine, sold as a tonic. The advertisement didn't just feature actors or athletes, but Roman popes. Yes, Pope Leo XIII posed with a bottle in hand, and personally awarded the creator of this mixture a gold medal. Because it sold well, very well, but that was just the beginning. Next came work with doctors. Pharma companies realized, if you convince the doctor, you gain a customer. So began a massive effort targeting clinics, medical journals, scientific conferences. The manufacturer sends a representative to the hospital who hands out brochures, sponsors training, pays for travel. In return, the doctor, knowingly or not, starts prescribing that specific drug. On paper, everything looks clean. In reality, it's a subtle manipulation of the trust patients place in their doctors. And it works, on a massive scale. It's brainwashing, not through banners, but through white coats. This becomes especially clear in cases where the drug isn't entirely safe. The most infamous pharma scandal of recent decades, the opioid crisis in the United States of America. Purdue Pharma produced a drug called OxyContin, a powerful painkiller that was allegedly non-addictive. That's what the advertising materials claimed. That's what company representatives said at conferences. That's what articles funded by the company itself stated. Doctors were prescribing OxyContin by the thousands of prescriptions per day. And then it turned out, the drug didn't just cause addiction, it was comparable in its destructive power to heroin. But it was too late. By that time, tens of thousands of Americans had already become addicted. Many had died. Official data, more than 500,000 deaths from opioid overdoses in the United States of America alone. 500,000 people. One of the largest drug crises in history wasn't created by street gangs, but by legal pharma, under regulation, with licenses, supported by lobbyists. And this isn't a theory, it's a documented fact. Now the question, was the company punished? Formally, yes. Purdue Pharma admitted guilt and agreed to pay a multi-billion-dollar fine. But members of the Sackler family, who owned the company, not only retained their wealth, they avoided criminal liability. Because the rich have their own survival code and their own laws. This is not an isolated case. The French company Servier sold a drug called Mediator for decades. It was intended to help diabetics, but turned out to cause heart problems. It killed, by various estimates, from 500 to 2,000 people. And only after 33 years was it finally pulled from the market. Just imagine, for 3 decades, people were taking a drug that could potentially kill them. And the whole time, it remained freely available, only because it was profitable for the manufacturer. Pharmaceuticals, in its darker version, operates on a simple principle. If there's no noise, you can keep going. And until there's a scandal, until public pressure ignites, no one even thinks about stopping. But the scariest part is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Below are thousands of drugs produced without proper oversight. Studies are manipulated, side effects are downplayed, risks are disguised with polished language. And all of it is done under the banner of progress, under slogans of health. But behind those words always stands what truly drives pharma forward: profit. Only profit. When corporations earn billions from health, the limits of normal business become too narrow. They want more. They want influence. They enter the halls of power and begin rewriting the rules in their favor. Just last year, pharmaceutical companies in the United States of America spent $388 million on lobbying. That's more than any other industry in the country, including weapons, oil, and tobacco. It's more than Google, Amazon, and Meta spent combined. Why? The answer is simple: to prevent the government from regulating drug prices, to keep patents for as long as possible, to stop cheaper generics from being released. Every dollar invested in lobbyists brings back hundreds of millions in profit through inflated prices and exclusive rights. In the early 2000s, the pharmaceutical lobby in the United States of America pushed through a law that effectively prohibited the government from negotiating with drug manufacturers to lower prices on medications purchased through social programs. As a result, the same pack of pills in Canada costs twice as little as in the United States. And it's not because Canadians are luckier, it's simply because their laws are not written by pharmaceutical giants. Now imagine this. You are a retiree in the United States. You have diabetes or hypertension. You've worked hard your entire life, and now you can't afford your medication. And all because some committee, funded by Pfizer or Merck, convinced Congress that regulating prices is bad for the market. But the United States of America is not the only stage for such games. In the early 2000s, the government of the Republic of South Africa attempted to allow local companies to produce antiviral drugs for the treatment of HIV, bypassing international patents. The medications were too expensive, and the country was at the epicenter of the epidemic. What did Big Pharma do? 40 of the largest pharmaceutical companies sued South Africa. They demanded a ban on saving lives with cheaper generics. Only after massive public outcry, pressure from the media, NGOs, and human rights advocates, and only then, did the companies retreat. Otherwise, they would have continued to strangle the country with lawsuits. There are dozens of such stories. Big Pharma knows how to get its way when billions are at stake. It operates through committees, associations, friendly dinners, and long-term schemes. It prevents governments from lowering prices. It blocks the market from releasing generics. It pays doctors. It funds scientific studies in which the effectiveness of the desired drug is then accidentally discovered. And it does all of this legally. The problem isn't that pharma is evil. The problem is that it's a business focused on maximum revenue. And when a business is responsible for our health, the consequences of this conflict of interest become deadly. And the scariest consequences are often not the loud scandals, but the everyday tragedies no one talks about on television. Ordinary people who couldn't afford a medication. Those who didn't receive the needed treatment in time. Those who died in silence, yet pharmaceutical companies could have saved them, but they didn't find it profitable. And so, the question arises, if the industry that holds the lives of millions in its hands is unaccountable to society, if it writes its own rules, manipulates laws, and hides the truth, can we really trust it? Here begins the central dilemma of the modern world. We cannot live without Big Pharma. But living with it, too often we pay far too high a price. The pharmaceutical industry has given the world medicines that save millions. It gave us antibiotics, vaccines, insulin, and painkillers that make it possible to survive where once there was no hope. Thanks to these drugs, infant mortality has decreased dramatically over the past 100 years. Thanks to them, life expectancy in most countries has risen to levels unimaginable just a century ago. But at the same time, this is the same industry that once sold heroin as a safe remedy for coughs. The same industry that released medicines containing arsenic, radium, and mercury. The one that refused to acknowledge side effects until the very last moment, because admitting them meant financial loss. In the 2000s, a medication for asthma, Singulair, and its generics were developed. On the surface, it was just a standard drug that helped people breathe. But there was one detail. In some patients, it triggered psychosis, depression, and suicidal thoughts. People literally lost their minds. Some ended their lives. The official regulator of the United States of America received thousands of complaints, but the drug was never pulled from the market. They simply added a warning to the leaflet, in small print, and the sales continued. And there are countless such stories. When medicines become traps, when companies, fully aware of the risks, keep pushing the product to market, because too much has been invested. Because every day of delay means millions in losses. Because the life of an individual patient is not an asset, it's an expense. You could say these are just dark spots on a white canvas. That mistakes happen in every industry. But the problem runs deeper. This system is designed to function as long as there is no scandal. Until someone dies. Until a mass poisoning surfaces. Until that moment, there is silence. Optimization. Profit. Layered on top of this is advertising, aimed not only at patients but at doctors as well, through articles in scientific journals, through lobbying and industry committees, through grants, trips, and gifts. Where research ends and marketing begins is impossible to tell, which means a doctor may not even realize they are acting in the corporation's interest. That's exactly why trust in pharma is among the lowest across all industries, because pharma touches what is most intimate and vulnerable, our health. It's not just a business. It's an industry that holds human life in its hands. When someone sells us a phone, the worst we can lose is money. When someone sells us a drug, we risk our bodies, our minds, our futures. This is what makes pharma unique, and this is what makes us fear it. And yes, that fear can easily turn into hatred, into conspiracy theories, into outright denial. Some stop trusting vaccines. Some turn solely to folk remedies. Some refuse medical help and die. But the truth is, we cannot escape this system. No matter how much we may doubt it, pharma is already embedded in our lives. We've all used antibiotics. We've all received vaccines. We've all relied on a pill to ease the pain. And it is precisely this duality, salvation and dependency, that makes Big Pharma such an uncomfortable, painful, yet unavoidable element of our civilization. It is not good, and it is not evil. It is a mirror, and in that mirror, we see ourselves, our fears, our desire to control nature, our willingness to pay any price for one more chance. So the question is no longer whether pharma is good or bad. The question is, how long can we balance between need and the realization that our savior may also be our executioner? And perhaps, one day, we will learn not only how to heal the body, but also the system behind the pills.